Here is, yeah, you can see it a little better. This is what's left of Herod's palace. You can still see some of the mosaic floor. And if I remember correct, that's a swimming pool, wasn't it? He loved swimming pools. Had swimming pools in every one of his palaces that we saw. But that's he had right there on the sea, but he had a swimming pool in his house. Then I'll show you this picture is about the sign that was just up. And where Paul gave his testimony, some people believe that this is the area, the room that he gave that testimony in, but that's the ruins of that room. And this is Kelly, do you remember the word? The horse track? Hippodrome. This is a horse track. You can see the stands, and it was a horse track. And I imagine they probably had chariot races as well back then. Yeah. This was the aqueduct that, because every city had to get fresh water. They needed fresh water being on the coast. And so this aqueduct, and this is amazing to me. This thing is over 2,000 years old, and a lot of it still stands today. And it comes all the way from the Mount Carmel, bringing fresh water to Caesarea Philippi. I can't remember the exact mileage, but if I remember correctly, I think it drops about, do y'all remember this?
30 miles.
It's 30 miles, and how does it drop?
It drops 1 degree a mile.
1 degree a mile. Imagine engineers doing that 2,000 years ago. It's just unbelievable, but that's how they got their water. So we left there, went to Mount Carmel. This is where Elijah, of course, had his showdown with the prophets of Baal. I didn't get a lot of pictures here. It was actually closed, and so we didn't spend a lot of time there. But I was able to grab a few of these pictures. This is the Jezreel Valley that you hear so much about. It's a beautiful valley. And there's an interesting one here, and I wanted to point this out, but if my pointer, you see this? These airstrips, this was really interesting. There's two, that's an Air Force base. But you notice there's no buildings, and you won't see any airplanes. It's all underground. It's a strategic Air Force base, and what they do is the planes are all underground, and when they want to take off, they'll bring one up, an elevator, just like on an aircraft carrier, and take off. That way it's protected. For Israel. Yes, ma'am. That we're still in Israel in this part. Yes, ma'am. Israel Air Force Base. But I thought that was really interesting because we could hear the jets taking off, but we never saw any activity really down there. Again, I put these in ever so often just to prove we were there. So we left there and went to Megiddo. Now, right before we left, I preached. We were going through the book of Revelation chapter 16. And in verse 16, it talks about the kings of the earth gathering together at a place which in Hebrew is called Har-Megiddo. This is the Battle of Armageddon. This is the tell, or Har, hill in Hebrew, Megiddo. So that's where we are, at Tel Megiddo, and you can see the tell there. A tell is it's an archaeological man-made hill. And what it is you have civilizations that are built on top of one another. One civilization builds a town, it's destroyed. Another civilization builds on top of it, another on top of it, another on top of it, and eventually you get a hill, a mountain. And if I remember correctly, either 10 or 12 civilizations are stacked on top of this one. And it's huge, it's tremendous. I only have a few pictures. There's a picture of what it kind of looks like on the top. This area right here are horse stables that belong to some of the northern kings of Israel, those wicked kings. Some believe maybe even Solomon's horse stables, but I think some archaeologists believe it doesn't go back quite that far, but it certainly belonged to some of the kings of Israel.
Isn't this where we walked down?
Yes, it is. This is the gates as we went in, and you can see here are those gates where we're walking in. We're going to walk in and go up to the stables. So those are the gates. Another picture of the gates as we walk in. And then up on top of the hill are the stables. Those are the stables. And here is a manger. I wanted to be sure and put this in here. Because when Jesus was born in a manger, he wasn't born in a little wooden manger like we think. This is probably what he was born in, a stone manger like this. But that's where the horses were kept. This is where they got their water. Because, again, every city has to have its water. And every day, maybe twice a day, the women had to go and get water. That was part of their job. The women had it pretty rough back then. These were the steps that they had to use. Thankfully, we didn't have to use them. But you can begin to see how deep it is as we went down. And after you go down, then you go through a tunnel, and eventually you come to the fresh water, and we come back out.
Can I say something here? So what I noticed about this.
Microphone? They're not going to be able to hear you.
I don't need that.
They're not going to be able to hear you.
So what I noticed about this, is that these women, like he said, had to walk down these steps. And it wasn't just for, let's go get a drink of water. This was for their families and for their livestock. And so we were able to walk down the normal stairs they built for us. Right there is what they had to walk down, maybe carrying a baby or two. They probably carried the water on their head. And it made me realize that was tough back then. That was a tough life. And so we walked down. My knee was about to kill me by that time. We walked down, all the way down, and came all the way back. And they did that 2 times a day, maybe, you said. And so there it is. It just made me think, I don't know, I can't even explain how I felt when I saw that. I thought these women, poor ladies, had to do this. Just the women, no men? Yeah. We wouldn't have too much water if I had to do that.
Yeah. He said the men had the important job of sitting in the city gate talking, right? So, but here's a picture I wanted to throw in. This is the Jezreel Valley that sits outside of Megiddo. Again, this is where that end-time battle will take place. And I want you to notice how fertile, how beautiful it is. I'm going to show you some more pictures of it as well. And what we were told was this was all swampland when Israel first began to move back into their country. And they were able to drain the swamps and make it this very fertile land. And I believe it's the most fertile land per square foot than anywhere else in the world. There's some more pictures of it. And again, you can just see how beautiful it is. I mentioned to somebody I had no sinus issues in Israel. They said, well, there's just dirt over there. I'm like, no. Israel has a lot of greenery. Everything. They had bananas. They grew everything. Things that were not even native to Israel. They grew it all. One of the good things was all the fresh fruit we had every morning to eat, or every meal to eat. The fruit was just wonderful because I guess it's just all fresh. It's about the only thing I liked, that and the desserts. But if I'm not mistaken, the mountain right there, is that Mount Tabor? Okay, I'm getting a yes, so I got a confirmation. Supposedly, that's where the transfiguration took place, when Jesus took his disciples, or 3 of his disciples, up and transfigured, showed them his glory. But that's Mount Tabor there. We'll see another shot of it. This is Mount, what they call Precipice. This is where, it's in Nazareth, but if you'll remember the story where Jesus goes to the synagogue in Nazareth, and he reads from the scroll of Isaiah, and he basically says, today I'm fulfilling this, I'm the Messiah. Well, they get mad at him. They're like, you're just Joseph's son. You're no one, So they take him out to the peak of the mountain in Nazareth and attempt to throw him off. That's where we're headed, is to that place. That's the modern city of Nazareth. We didn't get the chance to go to the ancient city, but it's a beautiful area. Again, another picture of the modern city. And then here we are at the top, and again, that's Mount Tabor in the background, which is a little better picture. And here we have the Jezreel Valley as well. And I think I may have a little bit of a video shot of it as well. But look how green and fertile that is. And like I said, before it was just swampland, mosquito infested, they said. Yes, sir. Moray?
Just outside of the picture on the right, you'll see is Mount Gilboa.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Hill Moray and Mount Gilboa, that's where the Philistines were camped on the hill of Moray. Saul was camped on Mount Gilboa when Saul got killed when the fight happened.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing how small this country is, and so much happened in such a small area. I thought I had my little video. Here is what they call Mount Beatitudes. It's right on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. And we didn't get very many pictures while we were there. But it's a beautiful church is there, and a garden is there. And most likely they feel like this is the area where Jesus gave the sermon on the Mount. In this area, and it's just a very beautiful area. One of the things Kelly and I were talking about was in Jerusalem, it's so busy and so noisy and so loud and so crowded. You don't get the same feeling you get when you're in Galilee. Galilee is beautiful, it's quiet, it's not crowded. And I was listening to a tour guide just this past week who did a video on Galilee, and he said it's been his experience with Christians that they feel a connection with Jesus more in they call it the Galilee than Jerusalem because of that. And that's so true, because you can get in the quiet, you can kind of meditate, you can sit there and look, and it hasn't changed a whole lot. There's not a building or concrete built over everything. You can still see the mountains, you can see the ground, you can see everything. And you get to Jerusalem, it's nice, it's interesting, but it's just noise, it's cars honking. You have the Muslim call to prayer. I mean, it's just all of that, and so it's hard to have that same kind of connection that you do here. Galilee is just wonderful. I could have spent the whole time in Galilee. Caesarea Philippi. This is where Jesus took his disciples, and he asked Peter, who do people say I am? And he gave him a few of the options, and then he said, well, who do you say I am? He said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus said, well, on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. From what I understand, this was referred to as the gates of hell. This is a pagan sacrificial site. It didn't look like that in Jesus' day. There was a pagan temple there. I'll show you a illustration of it. But it's a beautiful place, just really beautiful. Let me get to the little niches is where they put their little statues of their little gods that they worshiped. That's what's left of some of the temple areas. Okay, so here's a picture. This is what it would have looked like in Jesus' day. And that temple is over that big area I pointed out. But that's what it looked like, more or less. But he took his disciples to this area to do that, to make that confession. And here the floor here is not original, but that's where one of Herod's sons, who was it? Philip. Okay, Philip, the tetrarch of that area, had one of his palaces. So that's the floor of one of his palaces. Not the original tiles, but that's where one of his palaces stood. And I wanted to throw this picture in here, this cedar, because we're not far from Lebanon. We're not real far from Lebanon, and you know the Bible often talks about the cedars of Lebanon. And so that's what that reminded me of whenever I saw that. It's just a beautiful area.
Did you talk about the mustard seed plant?
I didn't put the picture in.
No, okay, so let me just go back. So,
Yeah.
So, you know, when Kelsey had cancer, his cousin came to visit us in Houston, and this was special to me because she brought me a mustard seed. And she said, you just need this faith right here, Kelly. And so when we were there, we got to see the mustard seed plant. And it just kind of brought all that back around to show me that God is in control. He saved us. I mean, all he went through, and then there we were in the place to see the mustard seed plant.
This is a first century boat that was found. The Sea of Galilee, there was, I guess, a drought, and so the water table was very low, lower than it had been in many years. And so archaeologists knew that they would find some neat stuff. And so they began looking around, and they found the remains of this boat. And this is a common fishing boat from the first century. And so this would have been like the boat that the disciples of Christ fished from, and the boat that he would have probably ridden around. Not this exact boat, but a boat like this. And so this is in one of the museums there at the Sea of Galilee. And so there's just a couple of pictures of it here. Do what? What kind of wood? I have no idea. Do you know, Sonny? Olive wood, yeah, but not real sure. Yeah. It's good wood. Yeah. So our next stop was actually getting to go out on a boat on the Sea of Galilee. And I'll be honest with you, this was probably, I have to put this up there with one of the top experiences, because you got to go out on the Sea of Galilee, and it was quiet, it was peaceful, and you could look at all the shores and all the mountains, and you could think, okay, Jesus saw this same scenery. And that was really neat to be able to look at. And he was in a boat quite often with the disciples. And I'll let Kelly share a couple of things with you. I took a few pictures, and I made just a short video. I wish I would have made a longer video, but I'll show it, and I'll let Kelly do a little talking about it as well. Guys, it's a beautiful country. Don't think Israel's just barren deserts. It is a beautiful country. You've heard of when preachers preach about the storm coming up on the Sea of Galilee, the disciples caught in the storm. And they'll usually tell you how it wasn't uncommon for just a storm to come out of nowhere. See that gap in that mountain? That's where that wind and storm would come through. So the winds and storms would come through that gap, and that's how the storms would roll in on the Sea of Galilee. So I wanted to throw that in there. Do what? The food was different to me. Of course, I don't have good taste because of COVID. But there was a spice that just, I don't know, my smeller and taster is not quite right. I just didn't quite like it. But I survived on the bread and the rice and the dessert and the fruit. So, and every once in a while, they had some roast beef one time that reminded me of home. So, yeah, we did have a hamburger. We found a hamburger at one time. Oh, where's my video? I thought I had my video in here. Kelly, do you want to say anything about Sea of Galilee?
Well, for me, this was on the top of the list because, to be honest, I was not expecting that the sites we went to had a lot of Catholic churches on it. I didn't understand that part, and that's just me being ignorant of the facts. But when you get here, there's nothing anyone can do to mess with this. Does that make sense? And so when we were out there on our boat ride, they played some music, and then we were able to just kind of be lost in the moment and just know that Jesus walked on this water. Jesus was everywhere here, and I don't even have the words to describe it, but it was amazing. I felt so close to the Lord right there. And I think, Judy, you can attest to this as well, and Gary and Lynn, where are you? And Rick, do you agree with that? Janet, there you are. So it was an amazing experience. Just that right there, I could go back and spend all day and all night right there with the fish that I ate and the chicken and the vegetables
Kelly loves the food.
and the fruit
If it's healthy,
and the tuna.
she loves it. So I thought I had a little short video in here, but I guess it didn't play. This was a great experience. I just didn't get to get pictures. I had someone take a picture of Kelly, and they got a picture of me, but that was it. That's all we got. Well, it's a wetsuit. Yes. So to explain this, Kelly has RA, and then she has, what's it called?
It's called Raynaud's.
So when she touches anything cold, it's very painful. And I knew she was going to want to do this, but she wouldn't be able to because that water was ice cold. And so I was trying to figure out a way to do it. How could she do it? And I thought, let's just get a wetsuit like a diver wears. Of course, somebody said, well, she didn't really get baptized. Well, her head got wet, right? So, but that's how.
Who said that?
I don't remember.
You can look at her face right there, and you can see that tint of coldness in it.
There were a couple of people when they came out of the water, they looked like they were in shock. I'm not talking about just shock of how cold it was. They looked, I mean, it was like, are you okay? It was that cold. And Dr. Barry and Sonny baptized me, so I was glad that he did that for me. But that was very cold.
Something I thought was real cool was I'm listening to the Bible in a year, and the day that you posted those pictures about her getting baptized, well, it was the story about the Jordan River with the rocks and all that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Now, just an interesting fact, that's not where Jesus was baptized. Jesus was baptized by John out in the desert, and obviously that's not the desert. That's in Upper Galilee. And the reason why is because the place that's out in the desert, it's right on the border of Jordan. It's a very small part of the Jordan River. It can be kind of tense there at times. We tried to actually go see it for another reason, but it was closed. So most people go to this area. The water's a lot cleaner. There, the water is dirtier. There are other streams and rivers that run into it. And so most people are baptized there. Yeah. Plus all the minefields around it. The minefields around it. Yeah, you don't want to just jump out and run anywhere. There are lots of minefields when you get close to the borders. So, Capernaum. Capernaum is one of the cities that Jesus lived in once he began his ministry. This was the hometown of Peter. And so the archaeologists have believed that they found Peter's home, or Peter's mother-in-law's home, and that's where he lived, and Jesus probably lived with him. And so that's what this is a picture of, the remains of that. So I don't know if it is or not. It may be, but what's neat is to know that he was in that town, lived there, walked there, taught in the synagogue there. That's another picture of Peter's home. It was a church later. Christians began meeting there. There's a synagogue that was there. And here's an interesting thing. The synagogue, the white stones are from the 4th or 5th century. And this black on the bottom is from the 1st century. So the floor of this thing, or the base of this thing, was from the synagogue of Jesus' time. And those are just a few more pictures of this synagogue. See, Ed, we were there. We weren't just down at the boats for 2 weeks. And there's so much to see there. This is some of these places you could spend an entire day looking at everything, and we would spend maybe an hour or two because we're going from place to place to place all day. This is the shore of Capernaum, and it's just beautiful as you look out across the Sea of Galilee. And I couldn't help but think about how many times Jesus may have walked across the shores of this town, and Peter and the other disciples. That's just another picture. Do you have anything about Capernaum? Oh, I don't know. So you may not have heard of this town, Magdala or Migdal, it's called. This is the town Mary Magdalene was from. And so there's no biblical events recorded in this town, but archaeologists and historians believe there's absolutely no doubt that Jesus would have preached in this synagogue because he preached, the Bible says he preached in all the synagogues throughout Galilee. And this is a picture of the remains of the synagogue, the first century synagogue. So again, it's just interesting to look at that mosaic floor that's still there and to think that he stood there and preached and taught. But it's a big city. Again, I have lots of pictures, but I put a few in here for you to see. And there's one that I wanted you to see that still has that one. You can still see the remains of the plaster that was on the walls, the decoration that was there. And I thought that's interesting. And there's quite a bit of it still left throughout the synagogue, but I threw that one in there. This was a Jewish city, obviously. And I'm trying to remember some of my facts, but when the Jews revolted against the Romans, I believe there were 30,000 Jews killed by the Romans here. There were another 10,000 that were taken to help dig the canal at Corinth. And then there were another several thousand that were sold into slavery. So basically they wiped out the town during the revolt. This is Beth Sheen, if I said it right. And Sonny, if I get this wrong, please correct me. This city that you see the remains of down here is not the biblical site. Beth Sheen is the tell back here. And this is where you remember when Saul and his son Jonathan were killed in battle, and they were hung on the side of the walls of the city. This is that city. That city, Beth Sheen. Well, we began touring this Roman city, which is unbelievable. Just the ruins that are here. It's huge. I probably have a couple hundred pictures of this city. It's just unbelievable. We were working our way to the tell, but it started raining so hard we didn't get to go on top of the tell. So I didn't put any pictures of this city in here because it's not a biblical event, but I'll share them with you at some point. But it's unbelievable, all that remains of this Roman-style city. But the tell is the actual place where the biblical event happened. Kelly, you want to tell them about this?
This is the place I could not go and look at because it was, we made our way through the mountains, I think. Like, I guess we were all the way, I don't know, like we were this way in our bus. And so we get there and we encountered some, what are they called? Bedouins. And that was a very interesting ordeal. But anyway, so they got to go to the edge of it, and right there, show them what's built inside. That is, show them with your pointer. Right
I think they can see the monastery.
So right there, people actually live in that. That's the what?
Monastery.
People actually still live there, and they have to get there. So I don't know how they get there, but they do. So I hate that I couldn't go see it, but Kelsey even said that at the edge, there was. I have a fear of heights, which really stinks when you go to Israel. But when he went to the edge, or they went to the edge, you could see down there, and I hate I missed it.
Yeah.
But
another thing that's amazing about Israel is the change in terrain. You saw how green and lush it was in the pictures a moment ago. This is an hour and a half down the road, and we're in the mountains of the desert. I mean, it changes that quickly.
But I was really sad about it. These little Bedouin boys came up to us. You know how I'm about kids, and that of course they're lost. They don't know Christ, and so they came up to me, and I stood back because I'm scared of heights, like I told you. And he came up to me. He was right here in my face, wanted me to buy something from him. And it was just so sad. It made me realize while we were there that we are in the Holy Land. However, people are lost. and it just kind of brought it around. They live there, they see this, and yet they're lost.
Yeah. It's to get there, we were on a bus this wide, driving on a road this wide. And Kelly was just looking down at the floor of the bus. It was a little frightening. But you see this dirt path. They call this the Valley of the Shadow of Death because supposedly at the very bottom it never sees sunlight. It's that narrow. And this is the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. So when you read in your Bible about the Good Samaritan and the guy who is hurt, mugged, robbed on the road to Jericho, this is it. When Jesus and his disciples traveled from Jericho to Jerusalem, this is the road that they would have taken. Because Jericho is way down, like Dead Sea level, and Jerusalem is up high on Mount Moriah. Its elevation is much higher. And so that's why it was such a dangerous path. I watched a video of 3 hikers that hiked it this last year, and it took them 2 days. And it was a lot harder than they thought it was going to be. And watching them do it, I was thinking, hey, they used to do it way back when with no supplies, no backpack, no hiking shoes. Yeah, just hike it. In fact, if it were not for the Bedouins, they would have run out of water on the one that I watched. So the Bedouins were there to help them. So I just threw in a few. It's real, even though it's barren, it's beautiful to me. And you can kind of see the trail in some of the pictures. There's the trail. And there's that monastery back there. And you can see this hill we're standing on. You could slide down it and be gone. That's why Kelly didn't want to be on it.
The wind was blowing profusely too, and so I was like, I'm going to get blown off. He can't.
One of the interesting things, that Israel doesn't have the same safety regulations that we do. Which is kind of nice when you're walking around these ancient ruins. You get to actually touch them and walk in them, where here you would have to stand 50 feet back. And by the way, you can see a little bit of greenery here. When David talks about, leading his sheep to green pastures, that's what he's talking about. He's not talking about like the field over here across the street at the Akins farm. This is what he would have to lead his sheep to, little patches of green grass out in areas like this. And there's that trail, little marker. I think that road is going right along there. We got to go to the Holocaust Museum, which was a neat experience. I think it's something everybody should go to when you're there. This is the only picture I threw in just for the sake of time, but it is a unique museum, of course, chronicling all the things about the Holocaust. We went to the Israel Museum. If this is a model, you see how big it is. It's huge. But it was just pouring down rain, so we didn't really spend a lot of time looking at it. But that's what the temple looked like in Jesus' day. For those of you in Sunday school this morning, in our Sunday school lesson, Matthew 24, the disciples said, Jesus, look at the temple. They were so impressed with it. That's what it looked like. That's why they were so impressed with the temple. Here's Masada. There's no biblical significance to Masada, but it's their number one historical site that people go and see. It's a mountain fortress out in the desert on the Dead Sea. I don't have a picture of what it looks like from away. I just have some pictures from on top of Masada. It's about 2,000 feet, I believe, above the Dead Sea. So it's up there. And it is huge on top. See, I put videos in here. They're not working because this was a video where I just panned across to show you how big it is. It's not working for some reason. That's a picture of the Roman encampment. When the Jews revolted, it came down to a few Jews on top of Masada. and the Romans had them pinned in there, but they couldn't get to them because they were on top of the mountain. So the Romans encamped down below, and they ended up building a siege ramp to get to them. And when they finally got to them, they were all dead. They'd all killed themselves. And the reason why is because they felt like it was better to do that than to surrender and become slaves of the Romans. So it's a very significant place to the Jewish people. In fact, some of their military troops, when they, as a graduation ceremony, they will march at night by torches from Jerusalem to Masada, climb Masada, and they'll take an oath there, kind of saying the same thing that we'll stand for Israel until the very end, to the death. So it's a very unique place. Kelly stayed in the middle, but she did go up. It was kind of like what was it called? A trolley car, but it was big. What is it? Cable car. I was going to say a ski lift, but that wasn't right. It was a cable car. But it was big. It was nice. So here's En-Gedi. The thing about En-Gedi is where David, you've probably read the stories, Saul is chasing David all through the wilderness, the desert. And so David and his men hide in some caves. And it's in one of the caves that Saul walks in. He's relieving himself, and David sneaks up and has the opportunity to kill him, but he cuts a corner, probably one of the tassels off of his garments to prove that he could have done this. This happened. This is a desert oasis. That's the Dead Sea you can see from there, but it's just a desert oasis out there in the middle of nowhere. That may be Masada. Well, Masada looks kind of like that. That may not be it, but it looks kind of like that. But here's one of the caves, and there's a little bit of a waterfall right there. And to give you an idea of how big this is, there's a lady sitting on that rock right there. I'll zoom in a little bit and you can see her. Now you can see her sitting there. So it kind of gives you a little bit better perspective of how big that is. And so I got to do a little devotional here. Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is the original cave, but there are so many other caves there. Let me see. There's the Dead Sea. You can see from there. Okay, so those are some of the caves. I'm trying to remember if this is the picture or not. No, it's not it. The city of Qumran, they were very religious. This was what they call a mikvah. It was a bath, and they took ritual baths several times a day, and so that would be full of water, and they would just walk down into it, and it's a ritual cleansing that they would do. That may be a picture. I can't remember. There was a room here that was the room that they wrote their scrolls in. That was it. May have been the writing room there. Okay, here's the picture, I think. Yeah. You can probably see it because it's so big, but do you see the people rappelling? I assume archaeologists, because they're still working on discovering things in these caves. How many of you ever watch Expedition Unknown? I watched an episode about 6 months ago where he went with some archaeologists in one of these caves. They're still looking. They're still finding things. And so here are some, I assume, archaeologists, and they're rappelling down into those caves. The Dead Sea. This was pretty neat. I don't have any pictures besides that one. I guess, let's see. Yeah, that's it. I'll talk about that in a moment. I can't explain how easy you float in the Dead Sea. You just kick back and your legs go up, and you can straighten out like a 2x4, and you'll float. You cannot sink, and it's so hard to get back underwater that there were people in our group behind me that they could not get their legs back down in the water, and I would have to push their legs and grab their arms so that they would get back down. That's how easy you float. And how hard it is to get back. I think it would be impossible to drown unless you turned over on your belly and just stuck your face in the water. You cannot sink. It's impossible. Now, as I walked out into the water, it's nice clear water, but as you first walk into it, it's a little muddy. And I hit a boulder and tripped. And I would have fallen completely in the water had I not put my hands on the boulder, and it splashed some water on my hat. And the next day in the hotel, when I grabbed my hat, everywhere a water droplet landed, there was a hunk of salt. And that's how salty the Dead Sea is. But that's how much salt was in a drop of water. Do what? Well, I scraped my leg on a boulder. It's fine. It was cold. It wasn't as cold as the Jordan, but it was cold. I splashed a little bit in the corner of my mouth, and it did taste very nasty. Anything you want to talk about up to this point? Bethlehem, these are the hills of Bethlehem where the shepherds were. There's Kelly coming out of a cave. Now, I'm claustrophobic, so she can go in the caves, and I can go on top of the mountains. But there we are in one cave. I can go in big caves. And what they taught us was that the shepherds there at night would go into these caves because it was safe to go into the caves. They would take their sheep into the caves with them. That way they would be protected from animals. Plus, in the caves, if it were really cold outside, there would be warmth in the cave, that sort of thing. So we're in one of the caves in Bethlehem there. The Church of Nativity. Now, this is interesting. Supposedly, this is the site where Jesus was born. But I think there are 3 churches built on this site. There's the Catholic Church, there's the Greek Orthodox Church, and then another one, Armenian Church. They're all there together, and so it's all covered up, so you really can't see anything that's original. And so when you first walk in, you go through this little bitty door, and you walk into I believe the Greek Orthodox Church first. One of the people we were with that had been there before said they were really not looking forward to going back here because this room we're in right here was completely black. It was painted black, solid black. He didn't realize that they had taken the paint off since he had been there the last time. But they were restoring the place, and they took the black paint off, and when they did, they discovered just these beautiful paintings. And on top of the walls there are mosaic pieces that have gold in them. And the reason some of it's missing because people stole the gold. But from what I understand, there's a lot of gold in those pieces of mosaic. And I suppose at one time the top was completely covered with it. And they discovered these paintings of characters, I think, from the Christmas story. But that was all painted black, from what I understand. I'm not Catholic, obviously, but you have to hand it to them about their architecture. They have some beautiful buildings and architecture. This is one of them I was really impressed with. We're down in a cave under one of the churches. That particular cave was found after some renovations of one of the churches. And what they found in these caves were the bones of young children that were the ages of 2 and under. So if you remember your Christmas story about Herod having the boys that ages 2 and under killed, they think this is the evidence of that because that's the only bones that they found in these tombs were that of these young children of that age. Also, in some of those caves, this is where Jerome, I believe, translated the Bible. How many years was he there? Anybody remember? He was several years it took him, but he translated the Bible into Latin for the Catholic Church, but that's where he translated the Bible. Again, those are just pictures of those caves inside those windows. You couldn't actually go into those caves. Anything you wanted to say about the Church of Nativity?
Just when we came out again, I was completely shocked because it was Ramadan and no. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it was a prayer call for the Muslims to go to the mosque. So here we come out and this amazing experience, and then that starts echoing in the background, and it goes on for, it seems like forever. Again, bringing back to me the fact that we live in a lost world. They need Jesus, and there we were. I heard that. It just felt kind of off, I guess. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
It's all built on what's building where Jesus was born. And the James Rock was born. And what's Kelly was saying, Bethlehem is in the Palestinian area.
Mm-hmm.
The last group I took before this, we did not get to go to Bethlehem because there was some turmoil between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So Bethlehem was closed off. We had to go through checkpoints to get into Bethlehem. We had, once we got there, we had to get a Palestinian guy who was Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before COVID hit, in Bethlehem, the place where Jesus Christ was born, it's under Palestinian control, and the city of Bethlehem is 30% Christian. Because of tourism, with all the Christians coming there because it's a holy site of Christian. With COVID, most of these Christian people in Bethlehem, which is Palestinian, with the minarets with the prayer call going on all the time, these people went home because they lost their jobs. And our guy, who's Palestinian but Christian Palestinian, the number of Christians is down to 1%
Mm-hmm.
in Bethlehem
Because of COVID.
because of COVID. So here is a Christian Palestinian living in a completely Muslim town. But he's got to listen to this prayer calls twice a day, or look at that, 5 times a day, where they're screaming at the top of their lungs to
Yes.
the loudspeaker. So they have to come to prayer 5 times a day. Here's a believer in Jesus Christ in the city where he was born, having lived since not physically being persecuted, but mental persecution. And it's going on.
Yeah. I believe the last thing he asked us or said to us is if we'd pray for the Christians there. But it was, going into that area, to me, I was kind of already kind of looking over my shoulder a little on edge, because all my life, all I've ever seen on TV is trouble in the Palestinian areas. And so we go into the church, you kind of forget about all that, and the second you walk out, this loudspeaker's right across the street with this, and it just kind of, you're like, whoa, that's really weird, right here where Jesus was born. But same thing happened in the Garden of Gethsemane, didn't it?
Yes.
I think so. But anyway, yes, ma'am.
So the Muslims are trying very hard to get rid of the Christians?
No, not necessarily. The Christians that are in that area are not necessarily under a lot of persecution. I'm sure, not physical, but like jobs, just that sort of thing. They are under some persecution. So their main source of income was tourism. When COVID shut everything down, they lost their jobs, lost their source of income. And our tour guide said that his entire family moved to the States. It's just him and his wife and his children that live there, or his son that lives there now. So that's why the population of the Christians dropped so dramatically, is because of COVID and the fact that they had no work, no income. And you could tell we were some of the very first tour groups into these areas, because Israel just opened back up. And you could tell these people as they were coming. I wanted to buy from everybody because I felt sorry for them, because they were probably starving. They haven't had much income, but I didn't want to get ripped off either. A lot of pickpockets and just stuff like that. So Anyway, here's the Kidron Valley. Now, here's what's interesting about the Kidron Valley. You'll see the city, the old city of Jerusalem there. You have the valley, and it goes up onto the Mount of Olives. A lot of things happen in the Kidron Valley. Jesus would have crossed the Kidron Valley multiple times, going back and forth from the Mount of Olives to the city of Jerusalem. It also goes by other names. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I believe in Genesis, somewhere around Genesis 14, Abraham meets with the priest, or the king, he's called Melchizedek. Remember that story? It's in that valley. It's called the King's Valley in the book of Genesis, there where they meet. But this is that valley where Abraham met Melchizedek. And you know, when you read Hebrews, there are a lot of people who believe that Jesus and Melchizedek are the same, that Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ in the book of Genesis. But it's a beautiful valley. Yes, the Valley of Jehoshaphat. So it goes by several names. Again, I threw a proof in there. We were there. There's the tomb of Absalom, supposedly. Absalom, David's son. Now, of course, some of these sites, you know, who knows? But supposedly that's the tomb of Absalom. This is the Palm Sunday road, supposedly that Jesus, the path that he took on Palm Sunday. I'm not sure how likely that is. And it wasn't paved, obviously. But you really couldn't see a whole lot. That little street that we're on, these are just some of the views from that street where I took with my camera. You can see the Temple Mount pretty clearly. That's a two-way street, by the way. The Garden of Gethsemane, and that tree, they say, is probably about 2,000 years old. So it could have been in the garden at the time of Christ. It's a beautiful garden. There's a picture of our group. Okay, I want to show you this, and we'll probably be out of time. But I got to show you this. This was in Jerusalem. Like I said, it's hard to kind of make that connection because it's so noisy and so busy. But I really felt that connection here because of this excavation site. This was a first century street in the time of Christ that he would have walked on. The disciples would have walked on. It was a very busy street. On the left side, you see there would have been shops. They're kind of like doors on your left. Those were shops. Now, this morning in our Sunday school lesson, the disciples were so impressed with the temple, and Jesus said, I'll tell you, not one stone will be left on top of the other. Here's the evidence. Here are some of those stones. I'm going to show you. See the dent in the street? That's from the stones that were torn down off of the temple. There's a pile of the stones the Romans tore down from the temple that are still there. They left them there. And you know, they pried all those stones apart because when they burned the temple, all the gold furnishings and all the gold melted in the cracks. And so they were doing everything they could to pry those stones apart to get all the gold and everything out. And so those are stones from the temple that they left on the street. Again, you can kind of see the hole where the stone's made. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Milstead, but didn't our tour guide say that was the highest point? The Temple Mount, which was a retaining wall, but it, But that would be the spot where Satan took Jesus to tempt him to jump from the pinnacle of the temple. Is that correct? Be the same place? By tradition, okay. But that's actually a retaining wall. It's not part of a temple building. It was one of the retaining walls. That's why it's still standing. Okay. Let me show you one more thing. Caleb, are you sitting back there? Hey, go down to slide 201. And we'll finish with this one. This was another spot that was really special. Okay, the southern steps. These southern steps were uncovered, but these were steps that led up into the temple. And they found a lot of the mikvahs, the cleansing, the ritual baths. And so the men would have gone through these rituals baths before they went up into the temple. So this would have been a very common area for people to go into the temple. So most historians believe Jesus would have gone in and out of the temple through here multiple times. And they even believe that this is probably where Peter, because of Pentecost, this is where the multitude of people would have been going in and out of the temple. This would have been where he preached his sermon at Pentecost. And so it was really neat to be able to go out here and actually sit down on those steps. Now, some of the steps are rebuilt. Some of them are original. And I told Kelly, I said, hey, sit down. I want to get her a picture. And she sat down. She just sat down right where she was. But I said, no, not there, because she was sitting on some of the reconstructed. I said, I want a picture on the original stones. So we moved to where some of the original stones were. But it was just neat to think that may be the spot where Peter preached on his sermon on the day of Pentecost. And I went quickly, but that's the Mount of Olives right back here. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So they were built that way on purpose, so that you would stop. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'll say just a couple things here, and we're over our time, and I'll let Kelly say anything to close us. Jimmy Shelby couldn't be here tonight. He and Deborah went a couple of years ago, but Jimmy said it this way, and it expresses it well. If you have to pick up cans on the side of the road to make the money to go, it's worth it. It really is. It's worth it. If you go on vacations every year, Kelly and I don't usually do vacations often. I don't know what vacations cost nowadays, but it's worth skipping 2 or 3 of them, 4 of them, whatever it is, to do this one time. It's worth it. Go ahead, Doctor. Hang on just a sec, Doctor.
We cannot hear you. So I'm going to give you a microphone so we can hear you. No, how do you turn this thing on?
It should be on. There you go.
I'm not a pastor. I'm a deacon. I'm a physician. In fact, most people that went on the trip are my patients, or were my patients. I've retired. But the first time I went to Israel, it changed my life. And I'm getting cold chills talking about this right now. The Bible came alive. And I started searching the Bible. And when I began to search, I found my Savior. Now, I was saved, but seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened unto you. And I had to go back. And on the first time I went, I was just a member of a group. The second time I went, I was a leader of a group because friends asked me. I was so excited, like the woman at the well. I couldn't keep it in. And so they said, won't you go back and take us and you be our guide? Now, we still have an Israeli guide. So I've been several times now, and I still have periods that when I'm there, I can't hardly talk, and I start crying, thinking. And so I told Kelsey, I said, if you don't mind, would you do some of the devotionals? And he, oh yes. Okay. And so we kindly split them up, and it was great. The one I said, there's 2 that are really special to me after being over Malta. One is in the Garden Tomb, where Kelsey did the Lord's Supper with us. And the other one's in the Garden of Gethsemane. And those 2, to me, when I think about what occurred in both of those places, it just, I start crying when I try to talk about it. So just to reiterate, if you can, even if you have to pick up cans on the side of the road, it will change your life.
And if you can, go with a small group. There's I think you get a little more out of it when you go to a small group. The other thing I was going to say, and I'll give it to Kelly. We talked about in the city of Jerusalem how hard it is to connect because of all the noise and turmoil and all that. But I was thinking about today, if you've watched the news, there's a lot of fighting going on right now in Israel. You can't even go on the Temple Mount because of the riots and everything. But I got to thinking, when Jesus was in Jerusalem, it was the same way. The Romans were in charge, and the Jews hated them. And there was a constant fighting. In fact, when Jesus came into Jerusalem, riding in on the donkey at the triumphant entry, the Romans were afraid that he was going to start a revolt. They were afraid that there was going to be a big riot that day. And so when we were there, the tension, a little bit of tension that was there when Jesus was there. So it really wasn't a lot different when he was there. So.
No, I just want to say, he already said this, but we can't thank you enough for sending us on this trip. Words can't even describe it. People come up to us and say, well, how was your vacation? And I'm like, it wasn't really like a vacation. It was more of a pilgrimage, more of a life-changing experience. And for me, the very last day, we actually went down where Jesus was imprisoned. And Kelsey led a prayer. And for me, I work in a prison, but for me, it was kind of hit home that he was in solitary confinement for no reason. And as Kelsey brought out, there would have been other people who had been there before. So there could have been, stuff on the ground that's not nice. He had no food. And for me, that was a moment of my Savior did that for me. And it changed me. A lot of things changed me, but that right there, seeing that he did that willingly, they lowered him down. It was pitch black. He could have at any moment said, stop, I'm not doing this anymore, but he didn't. He did it for us. And just that moment and the prayer that he prayed was actually, instead of me praying, I videoed him. But anyway, if you ever get a chance, did you put that up there? It was amazing to be there and for him to do the devotionals, Dr. Milstead to do the devotionals, the friends that we made for a lifetime. And one quick story about Lynn. Can I give it real quick and then we'll go? So at the very end, we're trying to get on our plane. Can I tell this story, Lynn? So our tour guide is trying to shuffle us around like kids. And Lynn and I are trying to hold on to our suitcases. We're trying our best to keep up with the crowd. Well, all of a sudden, there's a big gap, and he is shuffling us along. I trip, lose some of my suitcases. I'm trying to get up. I don't know where Kelsey is. And I look up, and Lynn is falling all over her suitcases and stumbling around, and we're trying to catch up. But anyway, it's just moments like that. I'll be forever grateful that we have those moments. We bought a lot of jewelry together, didn't we? I'm talking to you, Janet. Janet, we bought lots of jewelry. Judy, we all did. So we had a lot of good times, a lot of good memories. So again, we don't even know how to pay you back for this, but thank you for sending us.
Did the men only get those hats? You couldn't have one of those hats?
What hat?
Like I had. Oh, she wear
Oh,
one.
I don't wear hats.
Hey, Kelly and I will stick around if y'all have any questions, and I know Dr. Mary and others will stick around that went on the trip. If y'all have any questions, we're here to answer those. And thank y'all for coming. Yes, ma'am.
Show any pictures that I saw, mostly from Lynn, of you doing those devotionals. And my thought then was, we invested our sending you so that you could be a blessing to other people besides us.
Yes, ma'am. And that's what's hard for us to express is our gratitude for that. So, but thank y'all so much for coming. And I'll share more with this at some point. It's just impossible to share everything. Because from daylight to dark, we were going nonstop. So if y'all have any questions, Kelly and I will stick around. And I'm sure some of the others that went on the trip will stick around too if y'all have any questions. Thank y'all for being here.